Now that we found out that most of you don't want to live to 120, but you still want to make sure that there's enough life in your years left, right? So let's discuss what is happening currently in terms of the whole movement from one size fits all towards a more personalized approach, right? So when you think about where medicine is heading, we are saying that you're moving towards a more predictive, personalized, and participatory sort of movement. So I'd like to start off the discussion from both of you first. Let's start with you, Dr. Narayana. Where do you think this whole, in real clinical practice, do you think that we are actually seeing this happen, or how long will that take?
So I think we are already seeing it to a large extent, and the amount that it's going to impact clinical practice in the years to come is going to be massive. So traditionally, how we've treated patients, at least in the oncology sphere, which is where I'm from, is that you treat patients based on outcomes from a clinical trial. Very often that's done in a different part of the world with patients who are, different. That could be ethnically, it could be socio-economically, and you try to apply those results to our patients. So as a patient, when you go to an oncologist and you say, okay, this is the treatment that you suggest for me, the first question you ask, how likely is it to work, and what are the side effects, and do you think it's a good idea for me? Now, unfortunately, projecting information like that onto the patient sitting in front of you is a very difficult situation. We know in our clinical practice that if we apply information from other parts of the globe, it may just not work. There are some drugs, for example, if we start them at the dose recommended in a Caucasian population, our patients will not go home. So I think we are all very aware of the fact that we need to get better, but I think we are getting more attuned to how exactly we do that. And I think the main thing is the availability of big data. So right now, the amount of actionable data we've had has been limited, but I think we are collecting a lot more data that's available to us, and I think it's being collected in a more amenable form to being pulled together. And I think that's going to have to shape the treatment, because the amount of money required and the amount of time required to do clinical trials in oncology is massive, and very often we treat complex and rare cancer types, so we can't do clinical trials for these patients. So in order to say for the patient sitting in front of us, in an Indian context, what is the likelihood that it will work for you is very, very important.
Yeah, because I think for cancer especially, they say 75% people will not respond to a particular the drug that you're looking at. So Arunima, let's move on to, you've been on both sides of the equation. You've run a company in diagnostics, and now you're also on the impact investing side. So from the diagnostic point of view, where do you see this transformation? Do you see this happening already, and how prevalent is that?
I think so. Advent of AI has changed the way we consume data and we generate the data, especially in healthcare as well. What we are seeing is wearable devices. Marcus talked about the ring. Most of us who are into at least fitness, we wear watches which track various aspects of HRV, heartbeat, sleep, all of those things. We have now hospital mattresses that can monitor a patient's blood pressure throughout the stay. Then there are various other aspects of how the data capture in healthcare is happening, and how AI is being leveraged on top of this data in terms of deciding what kind of treatment, what kind of lifestyle changes would work. On the medicine side, pharma is already working significantly on how do I make my therapy personalized. And yeah, personalized therapy, if you I talked about it 5-10 years back, it was still very, very expensive. But now generics are entering to a personalized therapy side. So we're seeing, especially as far as diagnosis is concerned, role of data, role of AI is becoming quite significant.
So let's zoom into the future, right? Let's say that we are talking about digital twins. We're talking about where you can actually see this happening. So if you, let's say, project 10 years into the future, where do you see the role of a digital twin?
I think it's a very interesting question. So I guess there's a caveat there. It would be very nice for us to anticipate what exactly happens when we put a patient together with surgery or medicine and anticipate how they respond. But I think where we are in 10 years depends heavily on what we are doing in the next 10 years. And I think what happens as a clinician is there's a lot of skepticism when we look at AI, there's a lot of skepticism when we look at innovation because sometimes we don't apply, the rigor and process required to actually turn these into clinically appropriate tools. Because, for example, wearable data is a great example, but what happens is wearable data is not necessarily hospital grade. Similarly, if we look at applying AI to pharmaceutical data, I think that we need to work better in a more regulated framework in order to make this actionable. Because otherwise what happens is there's a lot of things that are suggestive, but not things that we can take to clinic. And the problem with these ideas is they're revolutionary. They have the potential to transform everything. But if we don't deploy them in the right way initially, and clinicians and patients lose trust, then the whole thing is lost. So I think it depends it's very important that we all sit together now and design the kind of studies and we work together in order to see that this actually becomes useful in a clinical setting.
No, absolutely. But do you think that trending towards, for instance, knowing where you're going, because no disease is digital, like really, right? You don't go from being cancer-free to cancer. You don't go from being non-diabetic to diabetic. So in some ways, you're trending towards. So if you had the choice of saying, can I get some information of where I'm trending towards, actually getting that information, what would you think is a better option? And this can be politically incorrect as well.
Sitting next to a clinician. So to me, I think digital twin in healthcare, I saw digital twin maybe 10 years back when I saw tumor culture came into play, right? And tumor culture to me is an exact digital twin of what's happening inside the cancer. And fabulous example of can I use that as a treatment and see what works for the patient or not. And in healthcare, this is how I see digital twins emerging. It's not that I can replicate the whole human being or the lifestyle that they will lead in future. It's going to come in bits and pieces. What you and I do, Anu, is also no different than creating digital twin. You create NGS models, I create the entire pathology model of the patient. That is a digital twin in my dictionary. So digital twin have in healthcare been existent for a really long time. And there is a place for each of them. It's how the AI will play into this is how Dr. said. Eventually, these technologies will have to get into a proper regulated model, an FDA approval, for example, or a proper clinical study, and then they will have better acceptance from the clinician side.
So Dr. Nayan, do you think that all these technologies that we are getting to, we clearly need clinical grade data at the end of the day, but how do you suggest that we get there? Because if you have to also have the regulatory bodies in sync with that, so you need to have really expert level people to be there even on the regulatory side, but also on the clinical side and on the technology side. How do you bridge this gap together?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sorry if I sounded like a skeptic.
I was just trying to create some...
no, I honestly think that these are transformational. But the problem that I've seen is very often when we overpromise and we lose sight of the actual goal, then it can backfire. So I think what we have to do is we have to apply these technologies in very specific settings, and we have to work together, whether it's the scientists and the clinicians and the regulatory bodies. We have to design studies that are clinically sound, and then I think it will be of a lot more value rather than having generics. So I definitely think there's a huge potential for all of these. It's just that we have to design the studies in a right way, and that's why meetings like this are very important, where you have people from different backgrounds and different disciplines working together. I think bodies like this are very important. Multidisciplinary interactions are very important. So just that we understand everybody's background, and then ultimately the biggest beneficiary is going to be the patients. There's no doubt there.
No, I agree. I think sometimes when a technologist is making a product, they look at it as a tech person. They don't understand how a patient and a clinician is looking at it. And I think if you can put all these people together in a room, then I think it makes a lot more sense for us to be able to make it much more accessible to people. So Arunima, do you think that when you look at all of these changes that are happening from a volume-based towards a value-based. Do you think AI has a role in all of that?
Yeah, and often the debate that comes in healthcare is affordability, and that's where the volume-based versus value-based debate comes in. My personal perspective on that, and whatever I've seen in my healthcare career, is largely the innovation starts from the value-based, and when the distribution becomes significant enough for the volumes to pick up, that's when it becomes affordable for everybody. Targeted therapy started like that. Normal people couldn't afford targeted therapy and there was a time and that's why diagnostics wasn't being even done. You know, what do I do with a personalized diagnosis of my cancer when I cannot afford a targeted therapy? Today, people are able to afford both sides because, like I mentioned earlier, generics are coming into the targeted therapy side, and hence diagnostics also, the volumes are picking up there. The pricing will come down because of the volumes. So that's a value versus volume debate. And what AI will do is increase the reach. Innovation will come, somebody will pay for it, and the masses will benefit eventually.
So, doctor, you're dealing a lot with patients who potentially are also not so well off, right?
Yes.
How do you look at newer technologies where you're saying that you want to provide the best care for them, but clearly they don't have the ability to pay as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think that's a very good question, and that's a big focus for us, for the clinicians. I think the mistake sometimes that is made is to put the technology between the doctor and the patient, which number one, nobody likes. The doctors don't like it, the patients don't like it, and the adoption is very poor. But I think the problem in India is that there are too few doctors, there's a lack of expertise, they're overworked. So I think we have to basically heavy load diagnostics. I think diagnostics is going to be the place where it starts. That can allow to free up the valuable time of clinicians, like radiologists or pathologists. Having somebody who's trained in recognizing oncology is very few. In Bangalore, we might have a lot of oncopathologists. You travel 50 kilometers out, you're not going to get one. So I think AI will bring the cost down. The advantage that we have obviously in our country is economy of scale. So the unit economics eventually will work out. And also what happens is in countries like India that are still developing, unfortunately we focus on the upfront cost. So we think of a certain test or we think of a certain drug as very expensive, but we don't consider all of the other things that are lost. For example, if you put a patient on a drug that doesn't work, the patient progresses, right? Or they have a bad effect of that drug and they end up in the ICU. So those are all things that we consider, that we don't consider adequately. So I think it's a very complex area. I think we start off with the diagnostics. Somebody will have to figure out how to pay for it, but eventually I think India is the ideal place for it because of the volume and because of the fact that we do have a good environment for stakeholders to adopt it.
So I want to get back to one question that many times has bothered me. One is that people say it's okay, we can keep trying out new medicines, but your liver is still the same, right? I mean, if you're going to be taking in medicines that don't work for you, you're probably exposing your liver to things that they shouldn't be.
Absolutely.
So I think when we look at the whole value-based process, are we also considering those kind of outcomes? Because ultimately, when you're trying to build something, you want to build good outcomes, right? So if you had to build an ideal scenario, what would those be? Like, how would you measure something that would be best for both the patient as well as the doctor?
I think so. So basically, when you look at value-based care, you have to look at matching the right patient with the right treatment, the best operational efficiency. So how quick do they get to that treatment? How well do they tolerate it? If they have side effects, how well are those side effects managed, right? So there are quite a few things there. It sounds very simple, but it's not. So if you actually audit the number of patients who go through this process, the efficiency is still quite low. It's not necessarily human error. There are multiple errors. So I think a great place for us to start with AI is to take our existing workflows and improve the efficiency. No fancy new treatments, no expensive equipments. Just look at using AI to increase the operational efficiency either of your routine radiology scans or your routine testing, your histopathological testing in your imaging, I think that's a fantastic place to start. It will bring down costs, and once you have these little wins, then people are willing to invest money and people are willing to adopt technology.
Arunima, what do you think?
Yeah, 100% concur. So I remember there was this meeting I had at a cancer hospital in Rajasthan. This was a tier 3 town. There's a 300-bedded cancer hospital where all patients all over the surroundings came for treatment. There was not a single pathologist there who could read the report. So the sample had to come all the way to Bombay, and then there was a minimum 3 days extra, so transit time. If AI could solve that, that's a start, and that's a fabulous start, and AI is solving that. So I 100% agree. In healthcare anyway, fancy things don't move that fast. Fancy things, AI moves, healthcare moves very, very slow. Maybe right thing, at least as far as diseases are concerned.
So many years ago, I remember there used to be this whole thing where we were looking at orphan drugs and you're trying to repurpose them. Do you think AI could be now can finally use that, because we started this whole approach in 2005-06, but do you think now is a good time to be able to say that if you're moving towards a more value-based care, can we repurpose some of these into more useful outcomes?
I think so, absolutely. So I think as far as drug testing and things like that go, I think now the technology has caught up to a certain extent. I think it was ahead of its time initially, and we weren't able to explore those things adequately. I think now in healthcare at least, if we can look at improving the efficiency of what we have, so if we can reduce the burden of a clinical trial, if we can use AI to reduce the number of patients in a trial, we can use it to at least remove some of the treatment options for patients. I think that's a very good place to start.
Great. Any question we can take? One question. So the question is, how do we use AI and music to solve problems?
So I think I'm the wrong family member to answer that particular question. But I think music therapy is something that's been investigational for some time. Big disclosure here, I don't have much to do with music therapy. But I think part of it is also looking at patients who either we cannot cure or patients that we are not treating very well. How do we improve their experience, right? Hospitals are very anxiety-ridden, stressful place. So I think there are a lot of interesting studies that are coming out using VR and other things. So for example, a patient on chemotherapy, can you give them a VR headset? Can you give them music of their choice? Can you give them some relaxing visualizations? Does it reduce pain? Does it reduce anxiety? It actually does. So there are little pilot little pilot studies that are coming out of different parts of the world, and I think that information is exciting. So definitely something that you can look at.
Yeah, excuse me. In fact, just now you mentioned, and this question is now to you as well as to Dr. Marcus. In case of extreme pains and drugs are not giving any solution per se, do you have no AI based here? It's non-AI context. Any workarounds are there?
Any, sorry?
Workaround solutions, extreme pains. No clinical trials are also happening, I suppose.
So in cancer, I think if medications aren't working, so morphine is our gold standard. So depending on the type of cancer pain, very often there are anesthesias available, so you can give injectable local anesthetic blocks. So we do have some reasonably good treatment options for patients in severe pain, but the big challenge is working around the side effects. So they do have their side effects, but there are some pretty good options. Specifically, if you can tell me the kind of cancer pain, I can discuss that with you maybe off the stage.
Yeah, so I think we can probably take that offline. But there are some, you can look at a lot of the pharmacogenomic testing if the particular drug might work for a patient or not as well. I know we are run out of time, so thank you very much. I know that we were supposed to finish 5 minutes earlier, so we'll get there. Thank you so much, Dr. Narayan. Thank you so much, Arunima.
Thank you.